Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Data Room podcast. Today, we have a very special guest, Mr. Dillon Doherty, founder and CEO of Alleo.ai. I first heard about Alleo actually while I was working at the Ion, and Dylan reached out to one of my suite mates, and I heard that name come up again. So I was like, I got to meet this guy. It's a productivity kind of software AI tool, but I'm going to pass it off to Dylan to explain a little bit more about his background and where the company's at.
Yeah. So, hey, everyone. I'm Dylan. I'm founder of Alleo.ai as well as CEO. And we're working on what we call life optimization software. So, essentially, we're building a hub for advancing your life. How's my life going? And how do I improve? So, essentially, a tool like Jacob mentioned, like a productivity application, but also having a guided AI experience toward analyzing your information, generating recommendations, and essentially guiding you to living a better life. Today, we currently offer a life organizational application, which has been growing with more subscribers signing up to that. And we also are offering a coaching service as well called our Thrive Plan, which people can sign up for as well, which essentially has a human in the loop to guide you toward improving your life. But yeah, I'm really excited to be here and looking forward to hearing what you have to say and what questions you got.
Awesome. Well, so the first question that I like to ask every guest is, why did you agree to come on this podcast?
Um, I thought it'd be interesting to just talk with you and be able to get your hear what questions you have. Hopefully, reach some people so they can learn more about Alio. But yeah, I just wanted to get the word out there and also to support you as well. So I was happy to jump on.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. We've had a few great conversations up to this point. We spoke earlier this week at the Lily celebration. So
Mhm.
something I was really curious, I wanted to ask you is, whenever you founded Alio, was there kind of like a defining moment when you knew like this is the idea that you wanted to pursue and try to build it as a company? Like
Mhm.
what did that process look like from idea stage to actually building something?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wouldn't say there was a single moment where I knew. The analogy, I did have one epiphany to get started, but the experience, I described it more like either like I think of like I got my toe in the pool and my foot in the pool, and then I took another step in, another step in, and before you know it, I'm all the way in the pool, sort of thing. Or like the boiling a frog analogy, but yeah, essentially the way it got started was I was not actually thinking about creating a startup like this. I was just trying to figure out my next steps in my life, and I channeled that into building out an organizational system a few years ago for myself. Spent several hours, like I think almost 20, like inputting all the different things I had to do, different areas of my life, all this structure I was putting everybody I knew, all this kind of stuff. And it was a few weeks after that I had this epiphany. And I came at the time the idea was, man, if I was going to spend all the hours to do this, why did I have to do it this way? What if there was a way better, easier way to keep track of my life and have a place for life progress? And that was essentially what got me interested in it. So I basically just started researching and learning more. And for me, I did a lot of research in the beginning. So I was a bit cautious about just diving right in instantly. For context, I was working at a job full time at that time, and I didn't know a lot about entrepreneurship, like tech entrepreneurship. Although I was working in tech, and I basically was just doing a lot of time researching, interviewing people, learning more about the market, and eventually I did dive in more in terms of making the jump to actually build the product and get the company moving.
Yeah, how long would you say that kind of research and product dis market discovery period was?
Yeah, so for me, it was a pretty long time. I would say, and I was in my job, and I started working on the idea by myself. For context, I just had the idea, and I just started working on it. Never, I wasn't approaching it from a like a whiteboard with my friends. I'm trying to make a startup. It was more just I had an idea, and I really thought it was cool, and I just started working on it. I would say around we broke ground on the code about a year and a half after, well, for the current product, about a year and a half after I had the idea. And before then, so a pretty long time actually. And before that, I did code my own version of the app um, before, like a really rough version myself. But that was it wasn't really a tool that I could actually put out in the world and customers could use. It was more just me hacking away, and that was before I learned about all this stuff about like lean startup and customer interviews and that kind of thing. And then I went and did that.
Yeah, so when you first started it, right, it was you're saying it's more like just a personal thing. I think that's great, right? You're like solving a problem for yourself and then just kind of finding other people that have similar
Mhm.
problems and providing them a
Yeah.
solution. Like now that you've kind of turned just this idea for yourself into more of a business,
Mhm.
how has kind of your vision for what Alio could be evolved?
Yeah, so I would say Alia is definitely my vision's definitely expanded for sure. I think that in the beginning, the vision was primarily around just organize your life easily in one place. And honestly, I wasn't even super aware of what the other tools were at the time. I just was really interested in that. Like, okay, there's got to be a better way to do this. So like easy life organization in one place. That was the initial vision that I had, build an app for that. And I would say around, I don't remember exactly when, but I think around 2022. It was actually before the AI craze. I started developing this concept of what I called life optimization. It was supposed to be beyond life organization, like basically a platform for figuring out not just what day to day what you're doing, but more transformationally, how to actually live a really amazing life and have a tool that guides you. So I came up with this concept of the guided life optimization experience. And I think that was around, I think around like first half of 2022, maybe is when I kind of figured that out, or maybe even before that, like in 2021. I was quite a while ago I actually started coming up with that, but the idea kept evolving, partially because I was trying to figure out the technology, and there have been changes in the market with basically the ChatGPT LLM technology. There's been some advancements that have made certain things that I was actually already thinking of beforehand and trying to figure out how to do more feasible.
Mhm.
But yeah, now the vision is kind of like the broad vision is kind of like a cross between like a productivity software and almost like a life coach guided approach, as well as a personal assistant functionality that can basically, like I said, a hub for life advancement. And I would say the vision's been expanding over time, but it's been a back and forth pull between this really exciting, cool, broad vision in the big picture, but short term, we need to grow traction. We need to get more customers. We need to get the ball moving today. So that's essentially how I think about it.
Yeah, I think what you're building has tremendous potential. Obviously, there's a million different tools out there for like
Mhm.
planning and for scheduling, but the idea of optimizing your life, I think that resonates with a lot of people, especially in the startup world. People feel like their only constraint is the time. Like they know what they need to do, they know how to code or they know how to
Mhm.
sell or whatever it may be, but they're just constrained on their time. And so if you had a way like Alio with the life dashboard where you could see all your various priorities. I think it's a really, really cool
Mhm.
idea. Um, a minute ago, you said that you had a certain epiphany. I'm just curious, what was that one epiphany along your journey?
Mhm. No, it was the initial epiphany. There's been a few ideas, but the one I was referring to was the idea of even making this a business in the first place. Like
Okay.
I set up a tool to organize myself, and then I had the epiphany of this could be a business. And for context, I had been entrepreneurially inclined for a long time, but I wasn't so much thinking in the startup lens. I was thinking more in the kind of small business, or like I was interested in real estate. I was thinking more in that direction. And then I kind of stumbled into the tech startup thing. I did have a background, and for context for people listening, I studied computer science at Rice University, the same school you're going to, and I worked as a data scientist full time as a job, but that was never really what I do long term. But it did kind of, it was one of those things where you can't connect the dots forward, you can only connect them backwards. I think that's a quote I heard Steve Jobs
Mm.
say. And it ended up where this experience I had connected the dots backwards and it tied together into what I'm doing now. But that's not really how I planned it at the time.
Yeah, no, I actually really like that quote. I don't think I've heard that before, but it makes a lot of sense. Like
Mhm.
you can never really know exactly what the future holds. You can kind of just do the best in the present to prepare yourself for whatever that future may be. And that honestly kind of goes to the heart of why I started this podcast. I
Mhm.
know like ultimately one day I want to be an entrepreneur of some sorts. I'm just not exactly sure what the business will be or when that will happen. But by talking to founders like you, I'm trying to really learn as much as I can. And
Mhm.
with that, let's kind of talk a little bit more about kind of you at Alio. So as the CEO, what does your general day-to-day look like?
Mhm. Yeah. So basically, as a CEO, I'm responsible for making sure the whole business is moving forward. So I would say a lot of it kind of feels like hitting a bunch of different things, trying to keep all the things in the air, all the things going forward. That essentially, in terms of what I'm actually doing, it essentially primarily comes down to tasks and events. So I have different types of tasks I have to do. Some of them are more strategic, some of them are more tactical. And then I also have various calendar events as well, which go into different categories. So there's things like there's different angles you can look at it, but there's things like management of other people, there's versus sales versus like collecting customer feedback and doing customer interviews, things like researching for fundraising or meeting with investors or just like actually doing sales or really I touch all different parts of the business, but it's I don't know if you call it firefighting because it's not like things are blowing up, but it's kind of like you're always jumping to the thing where okay, where it's just like what is the thing that I think if I focused on this, it would move the ball forward the most for the company and just essentially making sure the whole company is moving forward. That's the best way to describe it.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. Like you're the one with the initial vision. You're the one that is ultimately bearing like the most responsibility for the success
Mhm.
of the company. And so that's
Mhm.
that's a lesson I learned about leadership over this past summer as an OE coordinator is like when you are the leader, kind of all the problems filter up to you. Like of course
Yeah.
you appreciate it if the people on your team are able to handle things, but there's always going to be something that they don't know how to address, and you're kind of like the final decision maker.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
as a
with
founder, I think there's so much to do. You often feel overloaded. You can't possibly do everything you're theoretically supposed to do. A lot of it is just kind of approximating, kind of doing the best you can to like I thought it was like called like the 80-20 principle, just trying to get most of the stuff mostly covered as best you can.
yeah, well, so with that, then what kind of leader would you say you are? Like, what type of CEO? What is your general approach to leading Alia?
Yeah, so generally, and I think I'm always, especially recently, been thinking about improving as a leader. So pretending like I'm the perfect leader, like we're all just human beings that are just kind of thrust into this and we're figuring it out. But I would say I have certain values that I try to implement in the company. Things like honesty, open communication, integrity. Um, I would say working hard, having initiative, being autonomous when possible. There's a certain values that I'm striving to build among myself and the people in the company. Generally, I like to do check-ins with people on the team and make sure that they feel good and that things are going. Help unblock them when necessary. But we often also use a lot of asynchronous communication as well. I'm not sure if there's a certain angle you want me to go at this or a certain type of answer, but I mean, a lot of it is it ends up happening a bit more informally. I think it's not really at or early the stage like, oh, I'm this strategic leader. It's more just do what we gotta do to get things to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've just been thinking a lot about I watched this show, this short series on Netflix about the founding of Uber and
Mhm.
like Travis Kalanick and just thinking about Steve Jobs and their leadership styles are very aggressive, very abrasive. But
Mhm.
then, the experience that I've had working at a startup and from a lot of the other startups that I've seen, it's a lot more of like a supportive culture. The CEO is always checking in on people. Like, do you have any I mean, it sounds like you're more towards the second one, like more checking in on people and trying to really like get everybody like
I try
a
to
more
find a
better
balance.
sense of community.
Yeah, I try to find a balance. I think that my default is to be kind of pushy, to be like, hey, we got to move the ball forward. Like, are also trying to relay down the pressure. Like, hey, I'm getting pressured by my mentors. I'm getting pressured by people saying we got to hit these metrics. We got to hit these goals. We're trying to position ourselves to do these things and not run out of money and grow our revenue and all that kind of stuff. Um, so I would say it's often a balance, and to some extent, I feel like I try to not. I don't want to drive people into the ground, right? So I'm trying to find a good balance between um, pushing people to do their best, but also being supportive. I think also working as a leader as well on trying to improve how I deal with that. I think some of it too is also how well the team member is performing. I think generally when someone's doing really great, you typically micromanage less because you can just trust them. If they're struggling, then you have to get more involved in trying to figure out what's going on. Or and then at that point, you may have to think about like, okay, should this person stay on the team or things like that.
Yeah, well, I guess speaking of, working with your team, what are some attributes that you look for when you're hiring new employees, and what is kind of your overall approach to hiring?
Yeah, so I try to have a systematic, thorough approach in terms of getting different people to interview, and I like to score people and be objective if I can, rather than just winging it. It's more my style to be systematic with things. I think in terms of attributes, like I said, I think ownership is important, like wanting to kind of autonomously prioritize and reason and figure out, okay, I know what the most important thing is. How do I get there? How do I make that happen for my role? I think that I've heard this phrase of like task level workers and then project level workers and then owner level workers. So ideally, the higher up they are on that chain, the better, especially at an early stage, because they can take more load off my plate. But it also depends if they're like a freelancer or are they an employee or like a full-time employee or an intern. But that's some of what I think about in addition to those principles that I mentioned earlier, like the honesty and I'm a very open, honest communicator. So I want to be able to communicate with them and they can communicate with me. And I'm not really into super indirect corporate, politics sort of things. That's not really my personality. So looking for people where that's kind of compatible as well.
Yeah, I think that's important, like being a good culture fit. And you kind of touched on a lot of the key attributes. Can you maybe like talk us through like one successful employee at Alio? Like you don't have to like name drop them or anything, but like what are some things that they've done really well that you like really appreciate and that you would look for in other
Mhm.
employees?
Yeah. So our most recent hire actually is doing a really great job. So I hired a lead developer to join our team and help accelerate our product progress. And she has been very communicative and just very on top of things. You can kind of feel that she's there, she's there, she's working, she's prioritizing what's better to do and what's not as good to do, really trying her best, getting things done, um, very transparent communication, open-minded. So I think, like I said, essentially embodying a lot of those traits that I mentioned before.
That's awesome. It's really rewarding when you can build a strong team around you. Something that we've been talking about in one of my entrepreneurship classes is hiring, like bad hires can be a big downfall of otherwise successful startups. Like if you overextend, hire too many people, or
Mhm.
hire one bad actor in a critical role, it can really run the whole company into the ground. But I think it's great that you've been able to find people that are,
Mhm.
aligned with your values and supporting your mission.
Mhm.
Um, so now kind of transitioning away from employees and specifically to you in the role of CEO, what are some like you mentioned before, like you're always trying to kind of push the business forward on all aspects. But what are some things specifically right now that you're focusing on?
Mhm. Yeah. So right now, my biggest focus has been on revenue growth. Or my number one focus is revenue growth, and then my number two focus is trying to figure out the financial strategy or will we fundraise, how much will we fundraise, that sort of thing. And So a lot of it's been trying to brainstorm, given the situation we're in, what are the different options for growing revenue? How should we acquire customers? How can we scale that? How much should we emphasize? I mentioned we had two plans. How much should we emphasize our coaching versus our software? And how is that going to transition over time? I mean, I'm trying to do more actual manual things, like actually going out and like just emailing people or posting things or reaching out to people or going in person to things, trying to actually be scrap. They call it like being scrappy, try, especially in that early stage, trying to just put yourself out there to grow, even if it's not the easiest thing to do, even if it's not the most comfortable thing to do. Just try to push to make sales, and I think that's something I've been working on. Um, like I mentioned, also figuring out the next steps for the fundraising, and then there's also things that take time, like just making sure that other people are moving forward. But that's more of a supporting role. Like for example, making sure that our lead developer is doing really well. Like so, like if she's messaging me like, oh, this, I need help with this, I need to test this, or I have this problem, or what should I do about this? Kind of having to interject and kind of provide feedback to move her initiatives forward.
For sure. So kind of going off of that, beyond the issue, like the objectives that you're working on achieving and some of your core values as a CEO, and even with your time management software, like beyond that, what habits do you have that or that you've developed over time that you think have helped contribute to your where you are now and that you think will be part of your current successes?
Yeah, so I can think of a few. I wouldn't say I'm a habit guru or anything, but I personally do inbox zero, and I find that I use a tool called Shift to do that relatively efficiently, where I aggregate all the different things I need to check, and I just clear them out pretty quickly. It probably takes me like 15 minutes a day, and I clear everything out, and then I then input anything that I'm going to deal with later as a brain dump within Aleo, and then I'm able to process those into items that I'm doing. That basically allows me nothing slips through the cracks. Essentially, basically just using my own product, and then I would also say self care somewhat is a big one. So for me, that would be just I exercise every day. Um, I sleep quite a bit, and also this is easier because I'm a like my own boss as the founder, but setting a sleep wake cycle that works for me. I'm not someone who does super well waking up super early, and I'm generally more of an advocate of like be awake and productive when you feel best and what lines up with your body the best, rather than there's some people who try to artificially force themselves to wake up super early and drink all this coffee and caffeine and have some crazy routine and have like some superior feelings about themselves because of that. I'm not really a believer in that. And it's okay other people if they want to do it. Everyone's different, fine. But for me, that's not really what works for me. So I'd say sleep, exercise, and then just basically finding the right balance of how to work a lot consistently for a long time, but not feel bad doing it. Like you want to feel good as a person. That way you can go a long time and you're not miserable. But you also need to get a lot done, and it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And I feel like for me, just setting up the way I've set up my life in terms of like where I live and how I spend my time and how I take care of myself, I feel like it has set me up well to focus on my business at a pretty high intensity for a long period of time. So like thinking about how my life set up impacts my ability to do this. I think that's important for people to think about.
Yeah, what I really appreciate about what you just said is your kind of long-term approach, like trying to create something that's not necessarily about maximizing how much you can do in the next week. It's like creating something sustainable to, of course, get a lot of work done, but also make sure you'll feel okay doing it and be in good health. I think that's a great answer. I want to go a little bit more into the specifics, like what time do you go to sleep and like how much sleep do you actually get per night?
Mhm. Yeah, I tend to wake up and go to bed fairly late because what's best for my body. Normally, I get up like at 9:30, and then I work until dinner, and then usually I go to dinner and work out, and then I work some after dinner, like a couple hours, and then I usually fall asleep probably like between 12 and 1, maybe like
Oh,
12:30, 1 normally. So that's about 9 hours of sleep at night from 12:30 to 1, 9:30. And then I usually work that day, and then I work in the evening a little
that's
bit.
impressive that you're able to get 9 hours. That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah, about 9 hours. I mean, sometimes a little less, sometimes more. I mean, I would say 90 something like 5+%. I probably sleep anywhere from 7 to 10. Probably about 8.5 is average.
Yeah, and did you ever, when you were in college, did you ever go through a period of a lot less than 8 hours? Like I just looking
Mhm.
around at my peers at Rice, like I think a lot of people really struggle with getting enough sleep. And like, have you ever been in that place? And how could you compare being in that place to getting, 8.5+ hours of sleep?
Yeah, I wasn't an awful sleeper in college. I think the biggest thing that really messes up my sleep is for me is having to wake up early. Like I did have a couple 8 a.m. classes in college, and generally what I've found is that more variability in the sleep in the wake up times is bad. But for me also waking up earlier, I generally can't fall asleep as much earlier as I wake up earlier. So if I wake up at 6:30 instead of 9:30, I'm not going to be able to fall asleep at 10 instead of 1, right? I'll probably fall asleep more like 11:30 or something. So I don't, that seems to be the case. I don't get as much sleep if I wake up earlier. That's the biggest thing. So not having a thing like I generally not 100% successful because if there's a really important meeting, like I do offer for my most important meetings, like with customers and stuff, a little bit earlier on the calendar, um, because I really want to meet with them. So if they want to schedule like at 9 or something, I'll just get up and do it because it's important. But like I think on Tuesday, someone scheduled me at 9 a.m. coming up for something like one of the customer for the customer thing. So I'll be there. But I would say waking up, like avoiding having to get really early for things, which is easier when you find your own company. When you have some boss telling you have to be there at 8 or 9, that doesn't work as well, obviously. And then also I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but I tend to be more of a 7 day a week kind of person when it comes to work. So I pretty much work every day. Like this podcast we're doing on Saturday, and I like to work a comfortable amount pretty much every day, very consistently, sleep enough, exercise every day. I prefer that. Some people are like, I want to kill myself for 5 days, wake up, super early and drink a bunch of caffeine, go party with my friends 2 times, and then have like the whole weekend off or something like that, like a more irregular schedule. That's just not how I prefer to operate.
Mm, for sure. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I think you have something really
Mhm.
awesome for yourself going on. And one of
Mhm.
the things I'm curious about is, working 7 days a week.
Mhm.
Some people would talk about, getting burnt out or becoming like falling into a rut or something. Would you say it's just like because you're trying to build something that you own, you're really especially motivated, or because you believe in the vision of Alio and its benefit to the world? Like what keeps you at it day after day, week after week?
Um, yeah, that's a good question. In terms of what keeps me at it, I would say, well, first of all, for context, like I was like working really hard in high school. I was like becoming valedictorian of my school and all this stuff. And basically, I don't actually feel like I'm working very hard compared to how hard I used to work. So, so it sounds like a lot. From my perspective, it actually feels like less. Like I feel like not I'm not feeling, I rarely feel bad doing what I'm doing. I'm rarely having that feeling of I'm pushing through this, like I'm suffering, but I have to achieve this goal sort of feeling. Like I would feel that sometimes in college if there's like an assignment due and there's some hard push or something, there's too many assignments and they're all too close or something like that. Or there's some activities in school and then high school will be like it's 7 a.m., that kind of thing. So I think that helps not going into that suffering range of like I don't know if that makes sense, but I feel like I
Yeah.
used to feel that more. when the more regular schedule of school and stuff. And as an adult, I feel like it hasn't really been a thing as much. I think for me, there's also kind of this, I don't know how to describe it, but almost conceptualizing it like it feels like there's no other options. Like to me, it just feels like this is what I'm gonna do. Like there's, I think also I'm really passionate about just making the vision real and also hopefully financially doing well and like how that could change my life and change other people's lives. And so I think for me, the possibility of doing something amazing is motivating. Whereas just like guaranteed, all right, decent, that doesn't really excite me. And then lastly, I will say that being my own project makes a difference too. So when I was at a job I mentioned I had a job after college, and with that job, I was never really fully engaged. Where I was like, "This is what I want to do." It was always, "I'm just making money doing this," but really, I want to do something else. So there was often a feeling of clocking in, clocking out, like I'm just sitting here waiting for the time to end so I can go, so I can stop, sort of feeling. And when you're your own boss, you don't, at least for me, I don't really have to deal with that kind of feeling because it's all coming from within. You're setting the schedule, you're doing the thing. There's no notion of having to perform to meet other people's expectations. And I think that definitely has been a positive for me.
That's awesome. That's all. I'm so happy for you that it's working out really well, and I think you have a great system going. Kind of going off of that, now that you have such an established system, now that you're able to be your own boss, how would you say you've changed the most over the last 5 years and then over the last like 1 year?
5 years or 1 year? Um, Trying to think, the last big shift I had, I feel like was more than 5 years ago, but trying to think the best way to answer that is kind of a hard question. The biggest way I've changed in the last 5 years. Um,
I mean, if you had a big shift 6 years ago or something, that
yeah,
would be just as
yeah. So I
valuable.
would say that my last big shift, I would say, was around my senior year of high school. I was kind of in this hyper ambitious mindset from around when I was a teenager, basically, where I was like, I'm gonna be super successful. I'm gonna have this huge legacy. I'm gonna be like the president, like crazy ambitious kind of mindset. And I had kind of a big shift when I was in high school or a senior year where I adjusted to become more quality of life focused, where it's like, no, this is about, I just want to be happy. I want to live a good life. It's not about just like doing all this crazy stuff to like win and be the best and like get all the most legacy and accomplishments and stuff like that. Kind of realizing that wasn't actually that smart. That was a pretty big shift for me. I mean, that's kind of an oversimplified version of it, but yeah, that's basically a big shift. And then I would say I'm trying to think more life generally versus business. I mean, I've definitely been having it changes in my business mindset. I'm trying to think. I feel like my life mindset hasn't changed dramatically the past few years. I mean, after college is when I started exercising. I didn't exercise before college, and then I feel like it's been a big relief getting out of the job. It was a lot for me to balance working a full time job and trying to move this business forward. Because I
Mm,
mean, I went through the TechStars Accelerator, and that's how I went full time. But I had to go all the way from idea to being in a position where I can get a TechStars as a solo founder while I had a full time job. So there was a lot there.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Um, I want to kind of just ask a few more questions before we run out of time. So one of those questions is, have you ever had like a very big failure in your life, and what did you kind of learn from that experience?
Um, yeah, I would say a couple of things have been disappointing. Well, the first thing I would say is just this wouldn't be what I call a big failure, but so I applied. I didn't actually end up getting into the colleges I wanted to get into when I was in high school. I was hyper ambitious, and when I applied, I think I applied early to Stanford and a bunch of schools, and I didn't really get into any of the ones I really wanted to get into. So that was disappointing because I had like, it sounds stupid, like a first world problem sort of thing, but I had really in hindsight, kind of irrationally sacrificed to try to make that happen. Like I was just super laser focused on it. Like I was like not ever seeing any friends, not like just working like super hard, nonstop, trying to do that. And but I would say the real main failure would be my first. I did another business before this. My first business was like a pretty big failure. So, and I would say the biggest thing there is trying to take things more into your own hands for me when like I was overly dependent on another person who just wasn't performing. It was kind of a weak link, but in a sense that was my fault for putting myself in that kind of situation in the first place. So basically taught me the importance of being around good people on your team. And then also just I think another thing is just sometimes it's tempting. I tend to be very perseverant, but sometimes to a fault where it's like I get stuck in a rut and it's like it'd be better to reorient and try something different or but I just would kept pushing on the thing and pushing on the thing. Like I was trying to do a real estate business before this and it essentially I lost a lot of money trying to make it get it up and running, barely made any revenue. It never worked out. And I think that was essentially some of my big takeaways from that. But I mean, the experience did help me. I think, even though it's my first time making a tech startup, this isn't my first time to try to make a business. So I think that at least helps some.
Right. I mean, in entrepreneurship and startups, there's the concept of failing upwards. So, even if on paper it's a fail, like even if you lost some money and you never achieved like a sustainable business, it's still a lot of invaluable lessons. And I think I really resonate with that idea of just being able to rely on yourself. Like, of course, it's great to work with other people and have a co-founder
Mhm.
and things like that,
Yeah.
but especially if it's, your business, it's really important to be able to always push everything forward. Like, I don't know. I think it's like you
It's
can't
like,
always necessarily rely on other people. They don't always want the same thing that you want, and they don't always want it as bad as you do.
yeah, no one's going to make it want it as much as you want it. And yeah, like you said, it's like there's a couple quotes like buck stops with you or no excuses. Like basically, instead of, I think that a big part of it too is just like avoiding dependencies where it's like, if this thing out of my control happens, then I'm going to be successful. Like it's better to try to find a way forward where it's like, I'm in control. I just, I'll figure it out. I'll do this thing. I'll make it happen. Um, and just not letting really anything stand in your way. I think that's a lot of entrepreneurship is overcoming insurmountable odds. And just there's been times in my journey, especially like the last year or so, where things just felt ridiculously difficult and unexpected just through perseverance and just pushing at it and thinking I was able to achieve things that I didn't believe I was going to be able to achieve like a year ago by just really not taking no for an answer. It sounds cliche, but a lot of it's just trying to get creative and not getting overly stuck on one thing and trying to figure out some other way to move forward and to um, not have excuses basically.
Yeah, I agree. If you have that mindset of ultimate accountability, I think that's really powerful. Like, of
Mhm.
course, some things will happen in your life that's out of your control,
Mhm.
but just always, always finding a way to power through and doing the best you can with the hand you're dealt, I think is a really empowering mindset.
Mhm.
Uh, one other question I really wanted to ask you was, I'm sure you've had many mentors in your life or advisors or that type of thing. What is a really powerful lesson that they've taught you?
Um, I think a big lesson. I'm trying to think. There's a lot of lessons. First of all, around teaching a method of how to really understand customer progress, I think is really important. I use a method called job to be done methodology. I learned from my Techstars managing director, Neil Phillips Griffin, and he's super awesome. And then also I would say learning about financial model was important, but I think a lot of it was also I was being a bit too loosey goosey with with money and really getting higher in terms of spending too much money. And I think I got kind of some whipping in the shape in terms of like basically spending less on certain things and trying to get more creative to figure out how to make progress with less, and also just stepping up to the plate and doing things myself instead of delegating it. I think that was a big adjustment, a decent adjustment. Not
Yeah,
sure that
I
really,
mean, definitely.
but that's some insight.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, definitely important lessons. I think if you are not coming at things from a business background, like of course everyone knows, you don't want unnecessary expenses in a business. That's just common sense. But like actually being able to financially model, I think is a super useful thing and kind
Mhm.
of projecting different pathways for your business, it can help kind of take some of the ambiguity out of it. Like obviously all the inputs in a financial projection, or not all of them, but a lot of them are you have to make guesses and estimates. But it can be very helpful because sometimes you can't really necessarily think through the underlying like accounting of how the business would play out. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think it's also for the financial model important. I try to model based on real data as opposed to just making stuff up. So I try to use it more as a representation of what would happen based on what we know today rather than guessing at what would happen in the future. Like if there's a certain conversion rate on an acquisition channel, I just plug that in. I don't assume that it's going to get better over time per se. That's something that I learned as well. I think that was called magic growth. I was criticized for having magic growth, like kind of assuming, oh well, we'll figure out how to reduce our turn rate eventually, kind of thing, like in our model or something. Like no, or they're don't assume that. Like just plug in what you actually have. Like this should represent your actuals. And then if it's not working, you got to figure out what variable would need to change to make it work, and then go figure out what to do in real life to make that change true.
yeah. That's absolutely true. Like the idea of magic growth, like definitely, your company can get momentum and you could start getting brand recognition and more people will join, but also it doesn't happen by accident almost always. Like you really
Yeah.
have to be there doing something, making changes on the day to day to really move the business forward. And so with that it brings us to our final two questions.
Hmm.
So the first of those is what is something you want to tell me personally?
Um, I guess I just say keep up the good work. The other thing, I guess you mentioned working at a startup. I would say if you want to be an entrepreneur, just at some point just dive in. I feel like I'm a bit of I guess a fan of hands-on learning, like feeling like you'll learn a lot faster by just actually trying to do it, than by just like reading and thinking about it. That's just my opinion, but I feel like I've learned a lot by just because the thing is, there's so much you don't know, and you're gonna like you're gonna hit specific problems on your specific business where it's like you have to just figure so much out as you're going along that just like actually doing that and actually doing the work I think is really valuable. So getting those reps in, I'd say um, that'd be top thing.
For sure, for sure. I'm definitely gonna keep at it. And then our final question is, what is something you want to tell the viewers?
Yeah, I guess I'd say that appreciate you all listening in and hearing more about my background. If anybody wants to reach me, you can email me at my name Dillon at alleo.ai. And also, I'd love anybody who wants to check out our platform. Like I mentioned, shameless plug. We're working on growing our revenue and getting more customers. So we'd love for you to try out our life optimization application or our coaching service. You can go to alleo.ai, Alleo.ai, and check out our site.
Awesome. Well, Dylan, thank you so much for coming on. This is a great conversation. It's always good to talk to you, and I definitely learned a lot from, we discussed some things that we've never really discussed before. I think you brought a very fresh perspective from a lot of the other entrepreneurs that I've been hearing from recently. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, sounds good. I appreciate you as well, Jacob, and have a good rest of your weekend.
You too.